I'm going to tell a story that was brought to Newfoundland from Ireland and has been kept alive by the Brewer and Power families from Placentia Bay in Newfoundland. And it's called Peg Bearskin. And here we go. Well, there was one time in olden times, it was in farmers' times. It wasn't in your time or in my time, but in times ago, there was a man and a woman got married. Now, they were married for several years, but they had no children. And every day, this man, before he'd go out fishing in the morning, he'd beat his wife. Always, he was hard to his wife. He used to beat her, and he'd go out fishing, and he'd be crying, and she'd be crying, and he'd be out mad out fishing. Well, one morning, he gave his wife an awful beating. And after this, she was crying and lamenting. And there was an old man come along, and he asked her, what was the trouble? What ails you? He said. She said her husband was after beating her. Well, he said, he can't be a husband at all to beat his wife. Yes, she said, he was all right, only he used to beat her. And he said, well, why did he beat you? Why does he beat you? And she said, I don't know. She said, I suppose because she said, we have no children. Well, he said, that's easy handled. He said, for the children part of it, he said, you go in the garden. He said, you go into your parlor, you walk your parlor, he said, 3 times. Look out through the end window in your parlor, he said, and you'll see a tree. And on that tree, he said, there'll be 3 berries. Go out, he said, and take 2. Eat 2, he said, but don't eat the 3rd one. So that was all right. She done what he told her. And when she looked out through the window, the tree is there, and she goes out and the 3 berries is on the tree. And so she picked 2 of them. The first one she picked was a very nice berry. And the next one she picked was that much nicer. And that made her that she had to pick the 3rd one. So she picked the 3rd one. But that was a shocking bad sour berry when she ate it. But when she went in, she bothered no more than that over it. Now, at the same time, an eagle flew over the old fella as he was out fishing. And the eagle told him, go home. His wife was sick. She was giving birth to 3 babies. Well, he come in as quick as he could. And when he come in, the children was born. There was no 2 ways about it. There was 2 of them, the fairest ever the water wet or the sun shined on. But the other one, she was big, ugly, and hairy. So they called her Peg. Peg Bearskin, that's what she used to go by the name of. So when the daughters grew up, there was nobody there around, but they couldn't stay there any longer. They had to go seek their fortune. You know, they were looking for young men, as young women are always doing in that time and this time too. And Peg wanted to go with them, but sure, they wouldn't take Peg because she was too disgraceful looking. She was big, ugly, and hairy, and her hands were so big, and she was so unladylike. And they were so beautiful, and she was so ugly, but there was nothing they could do. She wasn't fit to be among them, that's what they thought. But their mother and father, they were just as good to Peg as they were to the rest of them, as far as that goes. Anyhow, when they were going, Peg said, I'm going with you. They said, no, you're not. So they left to go seek their fortune. They traveled on, and by and by they looked behind. And when they looked behind, sure, Peg was coming behind them. But they pelted rocks at Peg and drove her back. And that's all. She went back, and they went on. But at nightfall, they come into a forest. Oh, that forest was very dark and dismal. There was owls bawling, there was everything. There was coyotes and everything making a noise. And they were getting very frightened. So the last going off, the 2 of them got so much frightened that they sat down on a rock and began to cry in the forest. And they wished to themselves that they said to one another, if only we had let Peg come. Peg might know something to do, or she might be, well, we'd have some company anyway. Well, they were talking about Peg, but next thing you know, Peg come up to him. Now she says, where are you 2? You're here now, you're frightened to death. Get up out of this now, she said, because we could be devoured in any minute, she said. There's lions, wolves, and tigers here in this forest, and you could be devoured any minute. Come on with me. So they went on with Peg. Now by and by they see a light, and they goes up to the hut where the light is coming from. And when they goes up to the hut, Peg knocked on the door. And out come this old woman. Oh, she said, good night, Peg. Where'd you come from? Peg said, where I come from is no odds. But she said, I come seeking lodgings, she said, and I don't care, she said, about myself. So as I get lodgings from me two sisters. And she said, on the flag rocks, she said, that'd do me. So they got in. The old witch had two daughters and her servant girl, Betsy. But Betsy, what did she do? Only she put Peg's two sisters and the old woman's two daughters into one bed. Because, do you know something? The old woman is going to kill Peg's sisters and eat them. So when she put them into bed, she put nightcaps on their heads, red nightcaps on Peg's sisters. And she left her own daughters without any nightcaps at all. So she's not going to make any mistake. Well, now Peg, being a smart woman, she was aware of their trick. And when the old woman dozed off to sleep, Peg slips up and she puts the caps on the old woman's two daughters. And by and by, the old witch woke up. And when she woke up, she goes over to the room. And wacko, she chops the heads off of her own two daughters. And when she went back, she went on to sleep for the night. So Peg routed up her two sisters and they got on about their business. So, very good. Well, they had a good time going through the forest. The moon was bright and they traveled out and they traveled out until they came to the kingdom. And when the king see those two ladies, so beautiful and fair, sure, just all right. And Peg said to him, she said to the king, she said, I'll bring you a lantern, can show 12 square mile of light, she said, if you're satisfied for your eldest son and my eldest sister to be married. Well, her request was granted. But Peg says, there's one thing I want, she said. And the king says, what's that? I want a handful of salt. Now, Peg had a very big hand, as I told you. Her hand used to hold a hogshead of salt. Now, if you don't know what a hogshead is, you're going to have to Google it after the show. She had a pretty good hand, you know. So Peg got the handful of salt that she asked for, and away to go. And she went back to the old witches, and she got in. No one didn't know she was there. She upset all the drinking water in the buckets out in the porch, and she went to the chimney. She got out and went up on the roof and she fired the salt down into the boiler where the old woman was cooking her two daughters, only she didn't know it was her two daughters. And by and by she waited until the old woman, the old witch, went over and tasted the soup, and she said, my Betsy, she said, oh, the soup is horrible salty, she said. Put some water in it. So her servant girl Betsy goes out to get the water, and there's no water in the porch. The buckets are all upset. The bucket is empty. So Betsy had to go to the river to get water. And she said to Betsy, the night is dark, she said. And for afraid Peg, she said, might be around, hang the lantern on the corner of the house that shows 12 square miles of light, she said, and you'll see if Peg has come. But sure, Peg was down by the river, hid. And when Betsy goes down to get the water, Peg pushed Betsy out into the river. She went back and grabbed the lantern and away to go, back to the kingdom. And when the king got the lantern, he tried it out. It was correct. It could shine 12 square miles of light, and he was delighted with himself. He was delighted with Peg, and he remembered his promise. So Peg's oldest sister and his oldest son, they were married immediately, and they had the great time. They drank so much, they had all this liquor come from St. Pierre, and they had a wonderful time, and it was the best wedding that was ever heard of in that kingdom. Well, the next day, Peg goes to the king again. She said to him, she said to the king, she said, if you're satisfied for my second eldest sister and your second eldest son to be married, I'd bring you a decanter, could never be emptied. Very good, said the king, although, you know, he found it hard to believe. But she said, all I want for it is a handful of pepper. So very good, she got her handful of pepper, and that was a mighty handful of pepper, I can tell you. And she took her handful of pepper and away with her to the old witches. And the decanter was on the table. When she opened the door, the old witch said, ha ha, she said, Peg, I got you at last. Yes, Peg said, you have me, but it's not for long. And with that, Peg slapped a handful of pepper in the old witch's face, took the decanter, and away to go. Before the old witch got herself cleared out, Peg was gone, herself in the decanter, and she brought the decanter back to the old king. And sure, it couldn't be emptied. He tried it with everything. He put rum in it, and then he put whiskey in on top of that, and then he put milk in on top of that, and well, it was exactly what he wanted. Anyway, it could never be emptied. So the second son and the second sister got married, and by the chums, they had some wedding. I can tell you, I was there, and I danced till my feet got sore. So a nice bit after, Peg goes up to the king and she says to the king, she says, I can get you a horse, she said, can go faster than the wind, that a cannonball can't catch him, and the wind behind and before him whistles. Well, that was a wonderful horse for the king to have. Yes, he said. If you're satisfied, she said, for my youngest son, your youngest son, and me to be married. Well, now, Peg was big, ugly, and hairy, and for to marry a prince, well, that was a hard thing. That was very hard on that young prince. But if this had to be, well, it was his father's wish, and in them times, youngsters obeyed their parents. And if this horse was got, well, he agreed to marry Peg. So Peg asked him for a knife and a needle and thread. That's all she wanted. So she goes back, and when she goes back, she opened the door. She knocked on the door, and the old witch opened the door, and she said, well, Peg, she said, you're come at last. You were the cause of me killing my own 2 daughters. You done away with my servant girl, Betsy, and you huffed pepper in my face. Now, she said, if I done that with you, what would you do to me? Well, Peg said, ma'am, I tell you what I do. And a saw, that was the other thing she had. I tell you what I do, ma'am. She said, I'd go in the woods and I'd cut 2 hazel rods and I'd put you in a bag and I'd beat you till you'd bark like a dog, you'd mew like a cat, and your bones would rattle like crockeryware. Yes, Peg, she said, and that's what I'll do with you. So she puts Peg into the bag, hangs bag up to the tree, and she goes into the woods and get the hazel wand, and she takes her horse with her. But Peg had the bridge. They have to cross the river, and Peg had the bridge sawed almost through when she'd cross over. And the old witch would go across. She was going to let go of the bridge, and the old witch would be gone. That was what Peg's plan was. That was her plan. But when the witch went into the woods, when she was gone, Peg cut out of the bag, got the old woman's cat, all her crockeryware. She got the old woman's dog, and she put all into the bag and sewed it up with the needle and thread. And when the old witch come back, she was right in elements, and Peg was hid watching her. Now, Peg, she said, I'm going to see if your words will come out true. And the first smack she made, she struck the dog, and the dog began to yowl and bark. And Peg, she said, your words are coming out true. And the next smack she made, she struck the cat. Got the cat mad. The cat began to meow. My brother loved that because he's not fond of cats. Peg, she said, your words is coming out true. And the next thing, he smacked it into the crockeryware, and that began to rattle and break up the cups and saucers. And Peg looked out, you damn old fool. She said, you're beating up all your crockeryware. Peg, she said, this time I'll catch you. You won't get clear, but sure. Peg leapt out on the horse and away to go. And the old woman, when the old woman took after her, when she come to the bridge, Peg and the horse were after going over, and that weakened the bridge. And away goes the old witch out the river. Now, this is over. The old witch is gone. So Peg goes home, and she brings the horse to the king. He was tried out, and it turned out that he was just everything that Peg said he was, and it was the king's wish. So they had to... Peg and the king's youngest son was married. But now the poor old prince, he didn't enjoy himself very much. He stayed there with Peg, though. He didn't leave her. He stayed there with her. And all the others, they were going out to parties, his 2 brothers with Peg's 2 sisters, because they were so beautiful. They were always going out to balls and parties. And one evening, Peg said to him, she said, how is it you don't go out to the parties? He said, no. He said, no, I have no interest in parties. I wouldn't go out to the parties. He said, no, she said, you wouldn't go. You wouldn't take me with you. No, he said, that wasn't it. And he said, I'm married to you, he said, and I'm going to stay with you. Very well, says Peg, but you're still in trouble over that. She said, I can see that you're still in trouble over that, and I'll manage that with you if you'll only do what I tell you. He said, what's that? You go out, she said, and get a good fire of birch and get a good armload of birch and make a good fire. And when that's all done, I'll tell you the rest. So he went out and he got the birch, and there's lots of birch out this way in Newfoundland. And she made the big, great big Jeasley, great big fire like you'd make under a tan pot. And all is roaring up. The fire's going good and the birch is crackling. And Peg reached over and took off the wedding ring off of her finger. And she reached it to him. Now she said, "You heave me into the fire." He said, "No, I won't." "Oh, yes," she said, "you have to." He said, "No, I won't." So she took the ring and broke it fair in two pieces. Like I tell you, Peg was pretty strong. "Here," she said, "you keep this piece now," she said, "and I'm keeping the other piece, and you heave me in the fire. And if you ever meets one," she said, "to be your wife, she'll have a piece of that ring." And so she teased him so much. Oh my gosh, she was nagging him and nagging him and nagging him. He got so mad and tormented with her because he wasn't too interested in her anyhow. And so he slapped her into the fire and she went up the chimney in a flame. Oh my goodness. Now he sat down on the daybed. God. He thought bad of doing away with her because she was nice and everything like that. And she was good to him. He began lamenting now what a fool he was to take her advice and all this kind of stuff. And he sat there on the daybed, very sad. He was there lamenting, and by and by, there was a knock come on the door. When the knock come on the door, he didn't know whether he'd best get up and open the door or what to do, because he thought, there's someone come to see her. Some of her sisters now come to see where she was too, or something like that. And he'd be into the devil's tangle. Well, after a spell, the knocking continued and he opened the door. And when he opened the door, the fairest lady that ever water wet or the sun shined on was standing in the door. She said, "Good evening." And he said, "Good evening." She stood there in the door a spell. She said, "Are you going to invite me in?" He said, "Oh, yes, come on in, come on in." So she come in and sat down, and he was there with his head in his hands, and she said, "What happened?" She said, "What ails you?" And he said, "Not much." Well, anyway, she kept after him, and then he told her what happened. The last going off, he had to tell her. He told her about his wife, how she was so big, so ugly and hairy, and she persuaded him to burn her, which he said, "I shouldn't have done." And he said, and she said, "Did he leave you any token?" "Yes," he said, "she left me half a wedding ring." "I wonder," she said, "would that fit?" And then she took out the half wedding ring she had in her pocket, and the two pieces went together, just the same as they were before they were broken. Now, she said, "I'm Peg, back. I was enchanted," she said, "by that witch." And she said, "The witch is gone, the enchantment is broken. Now I'm your wife." And by the jumpings, every party after that for the whole winter, they went to it. And I was there one evening. That was in April, perhaps, I think it was. They were sat down to a tin table eating, and I sat down with them. And the tin table bended, so my stories ended. The table had to be stronger, my story'd be longer. And they had cocoa and coffee for tea. When I come away, I had the cocoa because I didn't like coffee, and I had the cocoa. So, and they had the coffee. And if they didn't live happy, I hope we may.
Oh my
And
goodness.
that's it.
I really, really enjoyed that. Thank you so much for your beautiful story. Did everybody enjoy that? Thumbs up if you did. Brilliant. And can I just say that we were after putting a link into the chat that if you could leave a review, all you have to do is click on it. So if you could do that during the evening, we'd really appreciate it. Now, that was a sample of the talent from St. John's in Newfoundland. And I have gone to their sessions once or twice. And I've met Ken Parsons, who's their great ambassador. And now the person that runs the sessions there, her name is Kaylee. And I'm going to ask her to unmute and to tell us all about the festival that they're having, because we're making friends across the ocean. So Kaylee, would you like to tell us a little bit about St. John's and invite us back?
I will have any of you back anytime we can manage it. So hello, and a huge thank you from me and from the St. John's Storytelling Festival from St. John's. And I will say, actually, Anita's on the other side of our large island. She's on the west coast, whereas we're here on the east coast. But I will quickly say as well that I would like to acknowledge that these lands which we are coming to you from are the unceded and unsurrendered territories of the Mi'kmaq and the Beothuk, and to also acknowledge our Indigenous neighbors in Labrador, the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatuavut, and the Innu of Nitassinan as the original peoples of this land, and are striving to continue to work to become in right relation with these peoples whose land we occupy. So about the St. John's Storytelling Festival, that name is actually now a misnomer, because we are an organization that runs storytelling events in all kinds of formats all year round. So our festival in a typical year would be just around the corner. It would be happening next week. And that's a usually 5 or 6 day affair where we have performances, workshops, get-togethers, and story walks out in nature. And right now we have pivoted online, which has given us this incredible opportunity to work with you fine folks across the Atlantic. So I'm thrilled about that. I will say we have more events coming up virtually as time goes on. We also have a monthly open mic storytelling session, which Maria, you have visited, and Francis as well, and a few other folks here. So all the information for our upcoming events will be on our website, and I'll post that link in the chat at some point this evening. That's probably it for me, unless you have any specific questions about our affairs.
I suppose, just like you, I'd like to mirror the fact that COVID has had a blessing in disguise in connecting us all and allowing us to meet under the virtual roof of Story. So it's been absolutely fabulous to have made contact with the great pockets of talent around the world. And we're so grateful that you have turned up for us in our virtual festival, because we're in the same boat. This festival would have gone on for 3 days. And of course, there's the Listowel Writers Week, that's world famous. And all of that has had to go virtual this year. But the silver lining is that it's so great to be in contact with you and other, kind of other groups like that. So thank you very much.
Thank you all so much. This is such a special opportunity for all of us here.
So I'm going to